without any further delay, it gives me great pleasure to hand over to Carmel McNaught and David Kennedy.
Right, well that now means I stand here. Oh, that means I'm in the way of the text chat.
Doesn't matter. We'll see.
Okay, all right, I'll move around. Okay, well, thank you all for coming, and on a bright, sunny, beautiful day. We are taking full credit for having brought a little rain to Cape Town. And I might add, for those of you who don't understand why David and I are so elegantly dressed, and you may care to look at our feet, today is Slipper Day, and if you haven't yet contributed your 10 Rand to a children's organisation, you can definitely give it to Tony at the end of the event. That's the end of the ads. All right, now, I'm going to talk a bit, see, we've got this problem with some of the technology that the presenter doesn't work. Can you just move on? Okay, now, who sees birds and who sees fishes first? Birds. Fishes. Both. Yeah, no, but first. Okay, right. So we have some people who read like that, some people who read like that, and some people who read like that. And I show this Escher image because, you know, each of us are different. And obviously David and I come from a different history from people in this room and people remotely. And you all pick up different things, which is why it should be a conversation. And so please interrupt me, either from a cue from something in the chat, which I probably won't see. You know, let's make it informal and interactive as we go along. But I think our core principles are transferable. And in fact, that's been the basis of quite a bit of my research, is on the universality of principles of good teaching and learning. So I think we'll hopefully all get something out of it. So what are you doing with that now? Well, I don't now. So can I have the next slide? I can't stand this next slide thing. Anyway, all right, now, this is our question. I've been working, and so has David, in learning technologies since the early 1990s. And you know, it's amazing. There's been wonderful stuff. First there was multimedia standalone, and there was the internet, and then all the other tools that have come in, social media, etc., etc. It's been this wonderful, almost avalanche of technologies that's become available. But in reality, the experience of students in most learning environments, whether they be rich or less resourced, is pretty awful. You know, we've still got the sage on the stage sort of issue. And what my argument is that we're not, as learning technologists, getting the message out there. We're not producing evidence that this is a better way to operate, and I'm at, you know, persuading people. I mean, I used to feel as a director of teaching and learning that my job was sort of like selling used cars or insurance. I was out there on the hustings trying to persuade people that I had a good product. And I think we're not doing enough of that, and we need really good evidence to prove to people that there are other options available and that they're going to be beneficial. Okay, I'm going to hand over to David now, who's going to talk a bit about, you know, about teaching and learning and so on.
Interesting. Good morning, everyone. I trust you can see and hear me with hope. Carmel's correct. You know, we were both teachers, directors of teaching and learning in Hong Kong at different universities, and we were discussing with Tony a little earlier on why it was that people didn't actually work more collaboratively, since we all have the same problems to solve. We're not really, you know, competitors. We're not like two car yard salespeople trying to sell two different machines. We're actually all involved in the same product. one of the things we're going to do today is we've got a number of examples from practice where we've looked at projects that have actually been evaluated and analysed and used for evidence for instigating change in institutions. And
oh, by the way, you don't need to take pictures or anything. We'll leave the PowerPoint.
yeah, all of the slides come with a Creative Commons license, and
if you make money out of it,
send it to us. You know, we'll take a percentage, but otherwise, you're welcome to use these things. I was asked a question a little while ago about on working in projects, because one of the challenges you face as a director of teaching and learning is that when you go and work with different content domains, often people will say, but my content domain is different. And we both have the same attitude to that particular statement, in that as long as you continue to teach human beings, then the needs of those particular human beings are likely to be the same. And although your content is different within the disciplines, you are still going to be faced with the same challenges in terms of learning of your students. So I sat down one day in the conversation and said, well, basically, you know, if we really get the essence of the teaching and learning environment, what can we say? And it seemed to me that these days there was traditional learning, which we all grew up with, you know, classes of 600, which dwindled to maybe 200 by the end of the semester, depending on the skill of the lecturer. Online learning, which everybody seems to be jumping into, and some institutions more so than others. So I noted that somebody said that they were interested in MOOCs and things like that, and massification of education. M-learning is obvious. A lot of my work in Hong Kong was looking at the affordances of mobile technologies to improve learning. And it was important that we take advantage of it. I think the mobile phone ownership in Hong Kong for smartphones now is approaching 100%. And when I was working there with smartphones and feature phones, it was already 150-something%. So it was a great sort of environment to do these things. But the one that's really come through in latter times is the concept of blended learning. Is not really about its e-learning or its mobile learning. It's taking advantage of the tools that we've got available to do things with. So can you, please? Okay, so let's look at the traditional. And when you start to look at traditional, you really got, what you end up with is median pace. You know, you either separate the groups in your classes out, or you go at a median pace. And that's probably the way many of us went to university, certainly at our age group. And there's certain characteristics about that that make it very, very specific. And this is still true in a lot of places in the world. Teacher-centered, linear, median pace, very transmission-oriented, fixed time and place in terms of timetabling and all the challenges that brings. There's longevity. That seems to have shrunk a bit. Okay, fine, it's been truncated. You know, Carmel and I, when we met sometime later in our lives, we discovered we had the same textbooks, even though we studied chemistry on different sides of the country. So that was very, very important in terms of content. People expected stuff to last. Assessment was mostly summative. You got to the end of the course, and if you were lucky, you got a comment saying, well done, you got a decent grade, but not much else sometimes. And then very much content focused. And one of the first conversations you have with people when you're dealing with content is, I have so much content to cover. Please. Then we got to online. Now, online has obviously some very, very specific advantages and affordances, and the flexibility is probably one of the biggest ones, that you can come and go as you do these things. And I'm reminded of one project I did many years ago at Monash University, where we were designing courses in economics for Australian diplomats. And they were scattered all over the world, and really the only way we could deliver those courses to them was online. And the flexibility, I remember we got an email from one of the people, and he said, terribly busy, won't be here for a couple of weeks, we just had an earthquake. And he was actually working in Turkey, and he did, and he vanished for 3 weeks out of the course, but then he came back and finished the course. So that level of flexibility enabled this person to complete the program and to do well in it. Then you've got abundant resources. Can I just have from the audience here, how many people have actually given up using textbooks specifically for their courses, and just make use of resources that they direct students to. Yeah, okay, more than half here, and maybe online people can answer that. So we have an abundance of resources, but we also have issues around the quality of those resources. So the judgment of the individual professor becomes more important. Then we focus a lot on formative and summative evaluation, and lots of opportunity. And both Carmel and I have had classes that we've taught where we make use of students, particularly for giving formative feedback and training them in the processes of making value judgments about the quality of work. And there's lots of opportunity. HOTS is higher order thinking skills, just in case you're wondering about that acronym. But there's lots of opportunity for students to be creative in the ways in which you go about answering these things. Next one, please. Okay. Now, blended is really so much going on in the literature about this and about around the world, and in fact a lot of companies, a lot of commercial companies are getting involved in blended modes of learning, and very much student focused, face-to-face and online. So you end up with situations where you get block modes of teaching and then you move to online after people have met each other. This has been used, particularly in the Australian context, for a very long time for professionals working in remote areas in Australia. They'll come in, they'll do a block work, and the rest of their courses will be online because they get the social contact in order to make that online contact work more effectively. Then you have the traditional and online in terms of learning resources. You can use either, and you've got great flexibility there. Summative and formative evaluation, as I've already mentioned, and hopefully building the skills, particularly information literacy and computer skills, to have effective lifelong learning so they can follow up over a period of time. Now, thank you. The last one, of course, is really, maybe we should have started with this one, but it really is the mobile world. And the mobile world, everybody knows about the rise of Facebook and Apple and Amazon, all of these social environments, of course. They're virtually ubiquitous. And although 100% ownership hasn't entered into many cultures yet, feature phones, my observation from working in Hong Kong was that a lot of stuff is on the chips within the phones, even the feature phones, but they're not activated yet. And that's how they do some of their pricing, is they turn things on and off. But when you're manufacturing a chip for a phone, it's very, very expensive, and all the features may be on a phone, but in fact are not activated in the phone you buy. So a lot of the focus here is on generating content, and certainly a number of the projects that I've been involved with, we focused a great deal on that, and using the mobile devices for students to generate content and to provide feedback. Lots and lots of opportunities for formative evaluation of activity, and again, self-motivated and lifelong learning opportunities for these people. Now there's a catch, however. The real problem is, and I read an article just a few days ago.
How many people would say they actively use mobile technology in teaching?
It's a good question. 1, 2. And can I ask what you do with it?
So we use it for feedback on assignments. Students will literally send you what their internet time.
Yep. So are you using voice or text?
Voice notes via WhatsApp. So
Okay, so you require data. Okay. And another individual? I saw a hand towards that right-hand side from me. Yep.
Video?
Yep, video. And what are you doing with the video, please?
The students can create their own videos or lecture videos.
Yep. Okay, cool. Okay, but the article was talking about a young professor in the US who's been doing a lot of blended learning for some considerable period of time, much as you're describing, and they were talking of lecturer burnout and overload is one of the serious problems with this particular approach, is that social networks and mobiles for everything and all the rest of it, it really does put a lot of pressure down on the lecturer in terms of designing. Now, we think that you need to get a bit more clever, if you like, about how you go about making use of the resources. And I've already mentioned the issue of using students and training them over a period of time to become more effective, particularly on the side of formative evaluation. And I'm not sure if you've ever tried it yourselves, but my observation when students start to evaluate other students, they are ruthless. They are so tough.
And teaching them to be kind is an important skill.
Yes, absolutely. They're much tougher than I am. Okay, please, one more.
Sorry. The one thing I noticed, we don't use it extensively, but we do have interactions via WhatsApp. Is that
Yeah.
one of the key problems is the lack of boundaries and the fact that students will WhatsApp you at like 11 o'clock on a Saturday night, asking like.
Oh, look.
My phone has a silent mode from sort of 9 o'clock in the evening till 7 o'clock in the morning. I don't get notifications.
Yeah.
The phone's down, face down. There's no light.
And what?
That also takes self-discipline on your side.
Yeah.
Well, that's in the settings. You don't.
Yeah,
you
it's just.
you don't do it every night.
No.
It's in your settings, and you create your spaces, and that you allow that interface.
I think one of the.
Learning is a potential issue, especially when you're new at using the mobile.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we used to overcome this issue was we brought in expectations on response times in various modes within the original course outlines. We're all required to publish and saying, you know, we had some quite difficult times initially, where, as you say, where a student would call you up at 11 p.m. or midnight or 1 o'clock in the morning, and they'd be grumpy if you didn't have an answer them by 9 o'clock in the morning. And so we had to put that and mandate that sort of information across the course outlines in order to alleviate that problem, because their expectations, the social media, if their friends don't respond within a couple of hours, oh no, they don't like me anymore. So that sort of instant gratification stuff has to be dealt with in a sensible manner so you can actually operate. I need to swap.
No, I guess I'm the...
I'm passing you the baton.
Oh, yeah. This is quite cool, really. I sort of feel I should bash somebody over the head.
No, we're not into violence.
No, we don't. Well, it's sort of... And it's sort of these slippers. They're Tai Chi. Have I become...
What's this Billy?
Oh, right. Okay. All right. I'm often... Well, just quick digression. When I first came to Southern Africa and went for my first job interview, and I got the job, and the guy said, oh, now that we're colleagues, what's your first name? And I had a broad Australian accent and said, Carmel. And he went around and said, oh, she seems nice, but her name's Camel. And it took a long time to actually get... So I have now learned the R sound, which is just does not exist in Australian English. So we think we've got civilized Australian accents. Now, remember my original question about evidence. And so while David's been talking, and we will continue to talk about learning design and the questions that you ask about it, but I guess this is a fairly provocative way of putting it, but are teachers prepared to invest in rigorous evaluation? If we're academics, as far as I'm concerned, it's part of our job. Our job is teaching, research, community administration. Right? Now, it seems to me that the problem with many universities is that teaching and research have gone into two different silos rather than having an overlap. And I'll explore that just a little bit more in a minute. But it seems to me that if you're really keen on trying new things with your students, that the only way a scholarly approach requires that you look for evidence of success rather than just thinking, oh, they sort of liked it, it was cool. Okay, next, please. There. Okay, so what we can have is 4 parts of this. We're going to talk about changing context, so that was sort of an introduction. We're going to talk a little bit about the nature of innovation itself within education. Definitely going to talk about evaluation and evaluation research, and then we'll move to 4 examples. So our plan is that, yeah, that's about right, So that by 12 o'clock we'll be just talking around examples, and then we'll just do a summary of some sort or another. Okay, next. I think it's you then, isn't it? Or is it me? It's you. You're going to do that bit. You see, notice our little cues. Organising a husband's tricky.
Dear.
He's no longer allowed to match the socks.
Nobody's perfect, you know, seriously. Okay, I thought it'd be, I'm assuming most people are familiar with the Horizon reports. Are people happy? No, yes, no, maybe? Okay, I'll go through it reasonably.
Really cool. It's a Christmas present.
Yeah, okay, so one of the things I think is an interesting exercise is maybe to have a look at the last 3 years of the Horizon reports and see what remains constant over time, because there are gentle shifts in the way they go. So let's go here, please. Okay. Short term, next 1 to 2 years. You know, blended learning has been on the horizon for quite some time, but they're talking about changes driving higher education across the world, particularly in the blended learning space. I have some concerns about that in terms of people managing their workloads and also educating the students to become part of that environment. The other process is collaborative learning, obviously. Now, we've talked about collaborative learning, but the higher education, the people that do these reports have suggested that collaborative learning is really has been more isolated than mainstream, and they're seeing that as moving forward. In the midterm, measurement of learning. And I don't think this necessarily means direct measurement of grades and things like that. It means gathering evidence on the ways in which the environment, the activities, the learning and the learning outcomes can be influenced.
And in particular, the way in which technology will give you information. So
yes.
What is commonly called learning analytics.
Yeah. So
logs have been around for a long time.
You know, one of the challenges has been for the learning analytics is the nature of those analytics. You know, they offer answers quite often presently in the how much, how often, but they're very, very poor at this point in time in saying why, or why did that happen. So that is likely to change, and change reasonably quickly as people get much cleverer at gathering those analytics and presenting those analytics in meaningful ways. I was working in the Emeritus last year, and I was working with a number of publishers, particularly aggregators, on e-learning projects, and they were building devices to give academics some knowledge of what students were doing with the e-learning resources. And one of the things we worked a lot on was doing infographics, that the sheer numbers were just overwhelming people and not really telling you very much. And so moving from those analytics, which are just sheer numbers, and presenting the data as dashboards in which people could see things visually was crucial. And I'm seeing that that's being well understood by many businesses that provide these resources, and I see that's going to develop over time. People have realized the power of infographics. Everybody, I assume, knows what I mean by an infographic. Is that comfortable with the term? Yeah, good. Okay. So the other one I think is critical is the learning. Is it?
Okay, it's all right.
Okay, all right. So I find it fascinating, and learning spaces are pretty obvious. I find it fascinating that we're still talking about deeper approaches to learning in 5 years. The literature has been talking about shallow and deep approaches to learning for pretty much the last 20 years, and now they're saying, finally, we're going to actually pay attention to this. And it does seem a little bit too little too late, because one of the projects we're going to talk about was looking at that. Thank you. So the significant challenges. I gave a presentation in the Philippines a few years ago, and I put up these student literacies, and everybody was really, really happy about student literacies. And then I put up another one that said teacher literacies, and people looked incredibly uncomfortable. Now, that's one of the challenges we face, is how literate are we in doing these things. I think the good news is, having worked in this area for a long time, is I honestly believe the tools have got a bit easier. You know, some of the original Windows 3.1 and the early stuff was grim in terms of usability, but I think there's opportunities there. I think the rewards for teaching, Carmel mentioned earlier about us not engaging as an academy in the scholarship of teaching and learning. One of the things that I found most useful as a director was gathering evidence of impact of learning environments to have the conversations with people who are not as embedded in the educational literature as people such as the people in this room. I think the real challenge here is going to be the competition. You know, we saw a brilliant presentation a few days ago on a commercial company based here in South Africa on improving English language skills. It was stunning. Very, very good. And the complexity and the feedback and the tracking, very, very clever stuff. And my question was, you know, it's a bit, you know, the wow for me was, hey, you guys are going to beat us at our own game if we're not careful in terms of the way in which we go about these things. Commercial provider going into universities and saying, we have got a better way of teaching your students English than you have. And I have to say, I agree. So that's one of the challenges, and these things are going to be keeping education relevant for what we do and how we build capacity within particularly within our graduates, and the things that we call graduate outcomes, because I don't think those things are going to go away anytime soon. Okay, yours. Click, please.
Oh, sorry.
Okay. No? Hang on, we just did that. Oh, sorry, yes.
That one.
That one.
See what I mean about men?
No, it's all right. Keep going. Sorry. One more.
Yeah.
Okay. So the key has always been in learning design and getting that right is using the tools. Okay? And for me, the toolbox has expanded enormously. One of the reasons I got into looking at technology and its impact on teaching and learning was I was a chemistry person. And I suddenly realized one day that my students were gathering so many misconceptions because I was representing three-dimensional structures on a 2D board. So I thought, well, there's got to be a better way of doing it than that. And I can't have a model for everybody. And so the whole three-dimensional representation of structures and things like enzymes, they become crucially important in understanding chemistry and particularly biochemistry. So that's very important.
The problem is, can I just interject? The problem is that we've been designing rotating molecules and so on since the early 1990s when multimedia really became around. And yet you still have chemistry lecturers
who don't use it.
No, we haven't got it. Who are still going in and drawing these things on boards. And at some point we need to be able to go between 2 and 3D. Why make it so hard? And so while the Horizon report, as David said, you know, they track it back and you find stuff like this as they've been talking about being on the horizon and coming in the next couple of years. They're still on the horizon. And I think that's part of my...
And I'll give you a good example. There's a particularly brilliant piece of work of physics, and the literature of scientific misconceptions is vast. It's been around, well before I started teaching. So one of the powers, people design stuff where it would take a student with their scientific misconception and use a model to allow them to get to a point where, like, it didn't make any sense anymore, to overcome that misconception. And the question that you then have to ask is, well, one of the problems with innovators is, why doesn't that innovation spread from one place to another? And I think part of that is going to be handled by Carmel, in which he talks about the scholarship of teaching and learning. So we've really got this initiative where we come right through from the Web 1 to the Web 2 to the Web 3. I think most of you understand this, and the real problem we've got in part of what we do is there's so much published content now, is that sorting this stuff out and getting, you know, OER projects that are very, very common now is going to be a challenge for everybody. I'm not going to talk very much to that one. Okay, so now I'm going to swap back because I do think we need a paradigm shift.
I just give you the cartoon.
I just give you the cartoon. And, you know, if you think about it, we are moving, hopefully, from a space of familiarity because we were, or most of us were taught in a traditional mode. And so moving into a new mode which is predominantly blended with, in my view, a fair emphasis on mobile technology is like leaping out of the security of the shell. And life is scary but exciting. All right, now, here's any mathematicians here? No? Okay, well, you're going to get the mathematical view of innovation and change. This is entirely my own construction. So it's J plus S plus CC3. The J curve is well known. It came out of economics, and probably one of the most famous books is Ian Bremmer's about a decade ago, which was looking at nations. And if you think about anything you do, things get worse before they get better. Any innovation has glitches. Nobody perfectly organizes what they're doing.
Yeah. I think this is a particular problem for innovators, because if you do a massive change, and I'm thinking of a particular project that I was involved with in Hong Kong, it did get worse. And the worst thing you can have is going to your senior manager and saying, well, it's not actually going as well as I thought it might be, but I'm in great expectations for the second year. So one of the issues that's always faced is how do you cope with this dip in productivity or this dip in student results when you believe that you've designed a framework and environment, your senior manager is going to say, no, it's not working, get rid of it.
So you have to build into learning design the need for a space and talk to students about the fact that this is going to be scary and a bit different and so on. And along with that comes what I call the Lone Ranger effect. If you are the only person doing the innovation, then that J is likely to get pretty deep because the students get confused by having most of their learning in a more or less traditional fashion, and then you come along and do something really different. Also, you don't get sustainability because the students' approaches to learning end up just being in that little micro experience with you. So it is something to think about very much in design, is to how to actually ensure that the depth of the J is not so high. Okay. S is that the S curve looks at levels of adoption of something. So because of the J curve, things are like tricky getting off the ground. So you get a sort of flat innovation over time. Then all of a sudden, you get what I'll call critical mass. And I think that's happened, let's say, with LMSs, but now they're ubiquitous. When I first went to Hong Kong, only 45% of teachers had any course on the university's LMS. And then learning management system, Blackboard, Moodle, Sakai, okay? Sakai, that's the stuff you, yeah, okay, right, okay, excellent, right. So, wonderful, please interrupt. And then eventually it takes off and you get a big growth. And people see technology innovation as being mainstream, okay? And then after a while, when you've got saturation, then you're actually now beginning to look at the next wave. So nothing ever stays still. So, we had, for example, I think now, learning management systems are pretty ubiquitous. Not everyone uses them or uses them well, but they're around and seen as an acceptable tool within a university. And so now, I think mobile technology is moving into another S. So you get, if you like, S's on S's on S's, as you go through the process. So it isn't like there is ever one learning solution in a particular time, because time moves on, technology moves on, and there are new ways. Okay, next one. CC3 is conceptual change model. Now, I'm not saying anything new. This comes back from the work of Lewin in 1950s in sociology. He was looking at, so I'm talking about any change, that if people are to get out of their comfort zone, are to leap out of the eggshell, then they need evidence, and I'm coming back again to evidence of the need for change. And once you see that things are not working optimally, you have to confront what that means. Now that applies to yourself learning something you want to learn, and it applies to the notion of a cultural change within a department, or I might add within a nation. That confronting what is meant by the need for change is never comfortable. We're in an uncomfortable zone. And then you construct a new approach. And so you see you've got the J and the S and the CC3 all intersect together in a number of ways. And I'm looking for a few people who want to do PhDs in this area, looking at taking the process of change and beginning to map what's involved actually in it, because the cost of innovation is quite high. Benefits are great, but the cost is high, and you need to do, and often the cost-benefit analysis is not done.
I'm encouraging everybody to have a look at Roger's model of innovation, where they talk about the impact of innovators and the chasm that exists between innovators and within organisations. Because many times, particularly in the University of Johannesburg, you will find people doing something innovative, but that innovation doesn't move beyond the individual. And as soon as that individual leaves the organisation, that innovation vanishes with them. So sustainability in terms of costs and things like that becomes crucial to the bottom line within senior management within an organisation.
Okay, right. Now I'm going to unpack the terms evaluation and research and say what I or we mean by them. It's all right. It's okay. I just taken it too. Okay, now just look at the blue boxes for the time being, and I wouldn't say what I think blended learning is, or if you like, technology-enabled learning. That the core bit is got nothing to do with technology. It may have to do with the social context of this period in history, but it doesn't have anything to do with technology. You think about your students, think about what it is that they need to learn, you devise learning activities and content, you get some assessment going, and by the way, assessment is a learning activity. These two should really be sort of morphed together. You constantly get feedback. I mean, I scan the room right now. If anyone falls asleep, they either had too much chocolate cake at morning tea, or I'll have to think about whether it's feedback to me. So there's that, and then eventually you think about really were you successful, and that's true within a course, it's true within a program, it's true within any activity you get involved in. Now that's the process of teaching, right? I mean that's what we do all the time. And then if you want to use technology, they're the red fluffies. And the red fluffies are the ways in which you can find out, in this case, more about your students. I mean, when people say to me, halfway through a semester, I didn't know that the students didn't know whatever it is. I gently suggest, why don't you use a bit of diagnostic testing? They might have been supposed to learn it the year before, but let's face it, the student who gets 50% on any university course doesn't know much. And our system is predicated on students half learning things and then going to a level at which they're supposed to have learnt that before they learnt something else. It's no wonder there's this concern about the quality of graduates in many universities, even top tier ones like UCT. The ones who get distinctions and A's, they're fine. The ones who scrape through a degree with their passes, I'm not sure that I'm terribly confident. So you need, I haven't finished that, all right? And then the rest of them I think are obvious, and as I said, we'll release a slide so you can look at them. There's lots of ways in which technology supports learning activities, obviously lots of ways for content, lots of ways for assessment. I'm going to talk about that particularly in the examples, and in fact we both will in that particular area. Okay, and by the way, the references are all going to be at the end of the slides if anyone wants to read any of them. If you can't get them, then email us and we'll send you a copy. All right, now that one, that's the bit I showed in the centre, right? Okay, now, next one. That's the same diagram, and I want to now look at it with respect to the nature of research. The nature of research is that you think about your research questions, you have instruments and methods, you have conventions within your discipline, you get research data, you analyse it, and you get some findings and discussion. Now you can see from the way in which I've put these two images together that the logic of research is the same as the logic of teaching. And I will argue this one strongly, that teaching is not different to research. It's in a different domain, and they're often a more complex and multifaceted one, but your student learning needs are sort of like the overall area of research. Research questions are like aims, learning outcomes. Instruments and methods are like the learning activities. It's the process. The research conventions are like content. Research data and the feedback for evaluation are synergies. Assessment and research analysis, findings, overall learning. Do you agree with me that teaching and research have the same logic? Anyone want to disagree? No? They're thinking. Oh, lovely.
I'd like to disagree.
Oh, lovely. Yes, go on.
I'll disagree in the way that with research, you don't know what answers you're going to find. But with teaching, you know what answers you want the students to have.
No, with teaching, you have, yes, I agree, that's more in focus of that. However, you do not know why students do not learn the way you expected. And your own assumptions about what teaching and learning are not, rock solid. So you end up with, hopefully, if you end up with no questions during the process of teaching, then you're not getting to know your students. Okay? You're devil's advocating? Good. Right. Okay. Do you need to say something?
I was simply saying that one of the things we know particularly is that if you know exactly what the student's going to say at the end of it, then they've memorized it. And they'll walk away from you and forget it before they even get to the end of the corridor. So one of the challenges you face with higher order learning outcomes is having students be able to articulate and form their own mental frameworks. And those you cannot predict into the future.
And also, I think one of the joys of teaching for me is that I often come across students who really are smarter than I am. Now, I don't think I'm dumb, but I've had this absolute pleasure of students who teach me more than I teach them. Is that a shared experience? I mean, you get some really, really bright, I assume at UCT you've got some really, really bright kids. Okay, so this is my mantra, if you like, that as teachers, we are researchers. So it's not that we're, it's a different job. Okay, next one. So my argument is that the engagement of teachers in change, remember the CC3, requires evidence. To get a change in the process requires evidence. That requires data. We're talking, and again it's another response to Tony, we're talking about new scenarios in terms of learning designs. We're talking about different ways of stimulating and involving students in what they do. So we're talking about research, and hence the term evaluation research. So that, that's all right, you don't have to ever apologise to me, dear. All right, evaluation is the process of answering. Well, there are a few things. Let's go there. Evaluation is the process of asking the question, did it work? Whatever it is. New learning design or a device or whatever. And the answer to that is yes, no, or maybe, or in some circumstances. It's a question that can be answered reasonably easily. The next bit is that research is the process of finding out why it works. And if we're to do, any innovation, having at least an explanation. Now remember, when you do research, particularly research in social sciences, you're not trying to find the explanation, you're trying to find an explanation. So a research paper is one that has logical coherence and enables the narrative of that research to be told and to hang together. There may well be other explanations and other factors you haven't thought about, but it hangs together, and the question is therefore answering the question, why did it work? Now, I don't see the point in doing anything if you don't. How many people have or have had little 2-3-year-olds? Children. Right? Why, Mummy? Why? But never, well, I don't know whether I did occasionally stop mine, but that innate curiosity in human beings is the one that we, as teachers, we should not be jaded academics. We should keep the flame alive. Okay, all right, next one. I think it's either me or you. Oh, no, it's me too. Oh, yeah, who knows the solo taxonomy? Now, this is another Christmas present, birthday, if you like, that it is simply awesome. You know of Bloom's taxonomy, right? Everyone's heard of Bloom's taxonomy. I think this is better. It has synergies with Bloom's, but what it is, SOLO stands for the structure of observed learning outcomes. And it's the process of looking at evidence across, holistically. Now, and I'm going to hopefully be provocative. I use it, and it was the basis for the assessment policy for the whole university at the Chinese University when I was there. But this is an A, this is a B, this is a C, and that one, whatever. Now let me unpack that a bit. The A student, or the PhD candidate, is someone who can take a question, look at lots of evidence, come up with some findings and explanation, and then turn it on its head. So if you imagine that to be a three-dimensional cylinder, and then you start looking down the side of the cylinder, you end up with something like that. It's something original, something fresh, something that is an extra contribution. So if you have very mundane assessment that doesn't allow students to show creativity and independent thinking and so on, then of course none of the students can get an A in my sort of framework here. That these are the words that are about this sort of transformational thinking, something that makes a difference to the person who's involved in the process. So this is A, and when you're analysing data, I analyse, let's say, forums, in discussion forums, there's this paper there was actually about that. Then what we did was look for evidence of that original contribution. Right? Now, the B student, and the master's student, if you like, is a student who has a question, looks at lots of data, and comes up with a logical, coherent process. But it may not be innovative. It just shows that they understand the process. And this is a compare and contrast, analyze, apply, that sort of slightly lower, but still very sound type of thinking is a B. This is a C, which is the Google copy and paste syndrome. It's, a lot of university students, which is I made the comment before, they get degrees at this level. They know lots of isolated stuff that they can produce in the short term. And this one, and whatever. Okay, so it's a very useful framework for thinking about analysing data and thinking about the quality of your research. This is research papers in top-tier journals. This is okay research papers. This is a dodgy conference paper, and that one's the abstract.
There's a particularly good question sitting behind you.
Pass the microphone, please. Sorry, because otherwise people outside can't hear.
You might like to have a read Gabriel's question.
I think in teaching, outcomes can be controlled like loose. Unlike. Oh, I don't think you. Thankfully, yeah, thanks for that, Gabriel. But no, I do not think you can control the human mind. And in fact, in many ways, if you are trying to control the teaching so that the students give you the answer that you want, then it's pretty low level. What you want is to design learning environments where the students have challenging tasks and questions to answer, and that will give you unexpected, unintended outcomes. So again, it's how you design.
I think there's a brilliant video which I'm happy to share with people. A lady made her reputation by interviewing graduates of Harvard University about scientific misconceptions back in the late 80s. And the teacher's impact actually made no difference. It didn't matter how much or how little science you'd done. These graduates had the same conceptions of simple stuff like the seasons that they had when they were 10 years old, and the teachers made zero difference.
Because my claim is that it's because they didn't set up learning environments that required the students to have that interrogation, and they didn't look for evidence of their success. The students can learn the answers to go through an exam, but if you don't really look for why they're responding in the way they are, why they're not answering higher order questions, then I personally would say you're not doing your job as a teacher. But that's just me. Oh, thanks, folks. Oh, yes, Shana. Oh, no, it was you, was it? Yeah, the Harvard misconceptions. Yes, agreed. Yes, we know that video. If you put that up any time, Tony, you might like to put up that video on misconceptions that comes from Harvard.
We'll check it out.
Yeah.
If you don't have a copy, I have a copy.
I'm sure it must be online somewhere, but okay. All right, fine. Next one, please. Okay, so, this I'll go through quickly. That one of the points about working in education is that you have heaps of data. My daughter is a neuroscientist, or one of our daughters is a neuroscientist, and her getting data on images of brains of folk with dementia is really hard. Whereas in teaching, we have so much data. We have opinion data. We have from teachers and from students. We have performance data. Assessment is research data. We have logs, as we were talking before, about learning analytics. We can video students. We can observe them. And we can get benchmarking from colleagues. Don't underestimate the value of more peer from your colleague teachers. I think it's quite sad that teachers in their own classrooms are often very isolated. Other people don't know what they teach, and they don't know what other people teach.
Can I ask a question? Amongst the colleagues here, who invites other colleagues into their classes to see what they're doing? Who goes into other classes to see what your colleagues are doing? Is that part of the culture here?
The latter. I don't really teach, so.
So I think one of the things that's a very powerful tool, if you like, a process, is to give people the confidence to see what's going on and visit other professors' classes to actually see how they do something. If you've got an innovative practice, then you hopefully have the confidence in your own mind to allow your colleagues to come and have a look and talk to your students and engage. And I think there's a great power and community building, a community of practice building, when you allow the operation of people coming into your class or sharing classes and not having it being formalized, oh, the head of department's coming to my class because I'm doing my performance review. And that's really quite negative.
Yeah. Okay, thanks. Here's some, this is what I give, with perhaps getting rid of the word evaluation research, but this is what all of my postgraduate students have to produce. They have to produce a research plan on 1 page. You know these research proposals full of irrelevant literature and all sorts of fluff and bubble and whatever. 1 page, in a nutshell, what is your plan for doing research? And I ask them to list what sort of questions, the questions they're going to ask, maybe the major one and some subs, and then where's the data coming from? And as I said, in education there is so much data. So you think you want to try something in a particular course. It can be a big change or even a small strategy. This type of process is saying, well, how am I going to get the data that will enable me to answer the research question? That's what, as teachers, we do when we try anything else out. But formalizing it in terms of a table like this means that you have a bit more, well, it's a bit of forward thinking. And so you don't have to do so much post hoc rationalization later about, how you can get a paper together out of it. But does anyone do this sort of thing? Is it appealing? Okay, well, let me go back. Yeah.
It's interesting. I ask my students to do that for research proposals as well. What's interesting is I don't do that myself for marking evaluation.
That's the question.
For me.
Yes.
It's useful for that. Why isn't it useful?
Exactly, because I'm saying it's the same process.
I think that's interesting.
Yeah. Interesting. Now, interesting is such an interesting word. I know, exactly. but you're thinking about doing it. I mean, that's the process of change, because you recognize that doing that, the middle C, in the CC3, the middle step, is one which says you have to confront your existing practice. So in order to change existing practice, there's a confrontation, an internal struggle that has to go on in order to make that change, yeah?
So I'm not sure that certainly for me it's ever about the confrontation, because I think we constantly are dealing with reading what our students give us in terms of response. But that is just a question of time.
Well, yes, but I mean, time is one of these elastic things. And I will be honest, my job at UJ at the moment is to work with a number of people who strike me as being really dedicated teachers, doing really interesting things in teaching, involved in all sorts of community projects, and never have time to do that extra reflective scholarly activity of writing about it. Now, my argument about writing is that it forces you to look at that logic, and it forces you to say, well, was this really as good as I thought? Can I actually map the way in which I'm answering research questions? Now, my argument is that if you're continually running on a treadmill, which is what I see a lot of academics doing, is that they're on this incredible treadmill that's got faster and faster and faster. And when I was a young academic, I, for example, spent all Tuesday morning, that was my allocated library morning. And it was before the internet, so I'd toddle across to the library, and I would spend all of Tuesday morning looking at a couple of new journals, looking along the new books, making sure I read one or two things properly, not just the abstract. I don't think I haven't done that for a long time. And so we do have a problem, systemic problem in higher education. Technology has produced an overload. And so we do have a time issue, but in the end it's always a question of priorities. And it's better to delay some innovation in order to, in order to make sure you understand what you're doing right now. and going that extra bit to do that extra reflection. At least that's sort of my way of looking at it. Okay, next one. All right, now I'm going to just again quickly, I want to talk to Tony about this. So this slide is purely for Tony. All right, that there are a lot of designers involved in it's not CILT, it's CILT. Right, I've got to get this right, don't I? CILT. Yes, CILT, yes. As in dirty bits, yeah. Yeah, aggregators, yeah. Okay, now, what I'm interested in, because I've been trying to look for a project to go across South African universities. The idea I came up with only 2 days ago, and therefore it needs a little mulling over, is what are the design principles that inform the work of individual designers? What are your a priori assumptions about what the work you do is? What's the most important thing that informs your work? Now, in design-based research, a community of practitioners and researchers come together to come up with a set of principles. And then you look at the way in which those principles get put into practice. So you have this down here. You get, what are you doing? All right, so you have these principles, and then you see how they're put into practice, and you do some testing, refinement, etc. And you have this process going on so that you have a community of designers, rather than what tends to happen in higher education in general is that you have hypotheses or questions, whatever you want. You do some experiments, you do some theory, and this is the researcher. And then you put it out in a paper for someone else to read. And practitioners are not involved in the process, and they may or may not pick up on the process. It's very inefficient. Whereas in design-based research, you grow that community. So the conversation between people who are learning designers by profession, people who are the technical parts of it and the perhaps more pedagogical parts, together with teachers they're working with, are all part of one community. And you end up with a set of design principles that are more likely to be valuable within the community. Now, that's a rather high-level version, but I think there's a lot going into Tom Reeves. Many of you will have heard of Tom Reeves. Well, he's dead keen on this and has, in fact, with others, set up a journal of design-based research. I think it's a very effective way. It's a sort of somewhat less fluffy version of action research. Action research is often like-minded people patting themselves on the back. Design-based research, because it requires the statement of principles and the evidence against those principles and the conscious re-articulation of the principles, is a little less, in my view, it's a bit more defensible. Now, I've been involved in action research, so I have that reservation about it. It's sort of, and the same with the community of practice stuff. People can get a little fluffy around the edges on that one. This is really cool. All right, fine, enough of that. I think it's you. I think we're having questions. All right, comments.
There's a very nice comment from Jerome up there about the politeness of students and the cultural aspects of it. It's interesting, when we worked in Hong Kong, Chinese students tend to be awesomely polite, even if they think you're rubbish. But they'll be very, very polite. And even in a Chinese culture, it's possible, if you work at it and continue time, but also model the behaviour in terms of giving feedback, you can build that sense of trust. I had a colleague who was a head of department, and he wanted to build trust amongst his staff to go visiting each other. And so what he did was take the leadership and say, well, come and visit me. I'm doing it this way, and I expect you to come and see me when I'm doing this. So he did want to do the sort of the management, the performance management type process, but to try and build a culture where it was okay and reasonable. And also it helps teach people to be kind to each other, to understand that the lesson they're going to see wasn't specially prepared 3 weeks in advance and all co-written and things like that, but it's an ordinary teaching day. And then bringing that into the staff meetings made a huge difference to the culture of that department. And I have to say that particular department at that institution was seriously fractured from a previous head of department, and this person had a great deal of work to do as the incoming head of department. So it doesn't matter whether you're talking about students or you're talking about staff, about your colleagues, building that culture of trust. It is seriously hard work, but it actually can be done over a period of time. Just don't expect it to happen next week.
Really good point. Certainly the last two examples we're going to give after this really are looking at issues of peer review and peer assessment. Teachers work far too hard. I don't see why they should do all the assessment. Students should do it. So in our examples we'll try and address that one. But are there any questions from the immediate audience that we're eyeballing? No? So how many people, all right then, let's have a vote. How many people will go along with my belief about the logic of teaching and research being, well, at least synergistic? Well, synergistic means like they're very similar. Oh, you're going with synergistic. We're not, the logic, I think, is pretty much the same. The process is obviously a bit different, but the logic. So who isn't? Anyone want to disagree further? No, you're not allowed to. You're students. Yeah.
Look, Tony set the example by playing the devil's advocate. Feel free.
No, okay. Well, take that one away, because for me, when I did that diagram, I wonder if there isn't something to learn from the medical case. Yes. Okay, and do comparative to resolve issues or reflect on outcome on a closed case. The difference between closed cases and open cases. So, well, can I just, that if you're going to ask students to come up with innovative solutions, probably there isn't one solution. And to all real life, real authentic problems, there's usually more than one solution. As I said, research is about an explanation, not the explanation. So open-ended questions are more likely to bring about this dialogue and unexpected outcomes than closed ones. Yeah, we do, yes.
There's also quite a fundamental difference between how medical professionals view accountability and how historically academics have viewed accountability. So in the medical profession, accountability to peers and openness to peers is well entrenched. The various kinds of, in the South African context, that there are legal issues people can ask for your file, and so they inculcate that into their students from very young, that we look at each other's work and we pull it apart, and we put you back together better than before. Quickly. I think in most academic spaces, there isn't a kind of attitude of we have mutual responsibility, not just to, or we don't just have responsibility to our students, we have responsibility to each other as a kind of a profession. I don't get necessarily quite the same sense of professional identity. And if there is, it's really related to the research elements. We watch each other's research activity all the time through peer review and whatever, but not each other's teaching activity.
Okay, that's a fabulous point. I'm going to summarize it just for the benefit of the microphone, that within the medical profession there is, in general, a much greater to and fro and acceptance of critique and acceptance of openness, if nothing else for legal reasons. But in the academic community, we have removed ourselves from that accountability. And again, that's an issue that needs to be looked at. If I run occasionally leadership workshops for heads of department, and getting through their discomfort around how building that trust within their department, rather than blaming the university or whatever, but that's the job of a leader, is to build those processes of trust. So you as teachers, we're leaders for students, and within departments, the heads of departments are meant to try and support that. It should be a cascade effect. Okay, next one, we have to move on. Oh, sorry, yes.
One comment was that I think in the UK they've tried to address that very accountability issue in universities with this new
Teaching excellence framework, yes.
which runs separate to the research excellence framework.
Yes.
Which is an interesting.
Well, I know, and the metrics, yeah.
Friends who are academics in the UK loathe it with a passion.
Well, and partly it's because it is about accountability. I'm not saying I like all the elements, and I don't like the fact that there isn't much in the way of scholarship associated with it. It's a much more top-down accountability model rather than a community scholarship model. And
From my understanding of the tip is that it relies quite a lot on whether or not your students actually like it.
I know, but we're getting into it. In Hong Kong, the professors take their students out to lunch the day before the student evaluations are to be written. And the university provides money for them to do that. All right? It's all about playing the game.
And one department I was involved with took it one step further. They handed out the graduate exit survey during the departmental dinner that was paid for by the department. And that year, you know, because my department was responsible for crunching all that stuff and designing the questionnaire. And so our solution to that problem was to move the entire questionnaire. We did a bit of brainstorming about the issue, and we said, well, actually, I'll tell you what, let's put the whole thing online, require it at a certain time, and we'll give students special benefits if they complete one government survey and our survey, but we took the power away from the department to stop them from doing this. And guess what? Their teaching evaluations, well, they didn't crash, but they returned to a more normal mode.
To a more realistic assessment.
We need to go.
Story time, and you can start off.
Better move along. What time is it?
We have to finish at 1 o'clock.
Okay, we'll make it.
But, yeah.
Okay.
I feel slipperish, I must say.
As long as you're not feeling slippery.
Okay. We've got a few examples, a couple from myself and a couple from Carmel. We've tried to sort of find examples that people will identify with or may be able to move forward with, and they're all in the literature somewhere, and you can see that at the end. I had a very interesting problem, educational problem in Hong Kong. If students just don't speak English very much, unless they absolutely have to. And the general number was around, 35 minutes a week.
Outside of class.
Outside of class. So think about that for a minute. Think about something you do that you only do for 35 minutes. Would you ever expect to get better at doing it? Probably not. You know, when it comes to exercise, 35 minutes once a week is just enough to make me feel very sore for the next 2 days and not do it again. So we had this very interesting project where we wanted to improve students' spoken English and English proficiency. And so we thought we'd use some of the tools that we had. And this was funded by the University Grants Council of the Hong Kong government. So they had these very, very competitive projects to get funding. So we asked the question, okay, can we change the curriculum? Can we alter the student experience by using these technologies that they all carried? You know, they'd forget their notes and their pens, but they definitely have their mobile phone in the classroom. And how can we give an opportunity for students to express themselves, to show that level of creativity in what they're doing in a less conventional environment? So we combined the two elements, ePortfolios for student content creation and curation, and feedback, and the use of mobile technologies for all of the other things and some of the things that people have been mentioning. So the context was a small Hong Kong university and a mandatory English language class, so all first years were required to do this thing. And our data was very, very specific. How are we going to answer this question? Technology uses. So we needed a comparison. And one of the issues that you have all the time with educational research is your cohort keeps changing. And doing experimental models of research becomes a serious problem because you can't keep the conditions the same. It's only a few hours a week. So what we did was we used the entire first year cohort as our base reference point to what we were doing within the class. And the other thing we did was choosing a questionnaire that didn't look totally specifically at grades, because people would say, oh, that was the teacher, or you had a particularly good group that year that got better grades. So we used a thing called the study process questionnaire. Who's come across that? Okay, there's a reference to it in the references, but it looks at students' strategies for learning. And one of the things we knew from surveys we've been giving to our incoming first-year students was the majority of students, by and large, used what we would call shallow approaches to teaching and learning. Sorry, to learning English.
You've heard of deep and surface?
Deep and surface is okay, yeah? So, I don't know about you, but you're never going to get good at something if, I don't care what it is, if you have a sort of a shallow approach, a regurgitation model for learning something. So you had a situation where the students knew rules of grammar better than most native English speakers, but couldn't actually speak or put two sentences together on paper with any degree of proficiency. Next slide. Okay. So, we had lots of stuff to play with. We tried to look at all the tools we had available to us and how we could use those tools. So we had the cloud. We set up our own personal private YouTube channel. We had some pretty powerful devices, and because of the funding, if the students didn't have what we needed, we could give it to them. So unlike many places that you read in the literature where a particular teacher has banned these devices in their classes so that the students must pay attention to them, we mandated they must bring these devices to class or else. Okay. And so we took advantage of that. We also got ethical clearance from the students and from the ethics group within the university to monitor not exactly what students were looking at. We didn't particularly care. But we wanted to see the average use of these devices in and out of class. And because they're using the Wi-Fi networks, we don't look at any individual. We could pull down broad swathes of data and create infographics to look at what they were doing. Thank you. All right. So we started to really use these. Anybody use clickers in classroom? You know the old ones? We've got to hand them out and then you've got to try and collect them in afterwards. It's a nightmare because you spend the next 20 minutes at the end of your class trying to get them all back. There are so many mobile tools that can use either smartphones or feature phones to do this within a class, so you simply don't have that problem anymore. All you need to do is set it up. It's very simple. The students had to rehearse a lot. One of the things that students do is if they get more than one chance to do a task, writing, speaking, whatever, and you give them a chance to modify what they're doing based on feedback, guess what? It gets better. The students want a better grade. And if you give them a chance to repeat what they're doing with feedback, they'll go back and spend hours trying to make it better. So we also used Dropbox, where we put the example for just-in-time learning when they just needed to know how to do something. We used a lot of Twitter before and after classes, but the most powerful tool for us was primarily YouTube and our private channel. Okay. Thank you. Okay. So what we did on the YouTube channel was very simple. We started that process of teaching students how to give feedback. And for that, we gave them the rubrics we were going to use for grading. And they then understood by grading others what their lecturers were going to do in terms of grading. So sharing these sorts of resources right at the front end. And that's the other thing. When you take this approach to teaching and learning, what tends to happen is you shift the workload to the beginning of the semester. You know, in a traditional, if I say one big difference, in a traditional environment, the workload occurs towards the end of a semester when you're giving summative feedback. But what we did was we front-loaded the beginning of the semester to do all the teaching, to get the students familiar with all the tools, to upskill them in terms of giving peer feedback, and then we could step away from the process. So we backed away from the thing. So the consequence here is the workload is definitely in the first 3 weeks, 4 weeks maybe, of a program like this, and lots of things. So this is what they did basically. We also used an ePortfolio. So it was the students had to do things, they had to capture evidence, and of course they used their mobile devices. And we let them practice lots. So we taught them funny skills like, doing it in front of a mirror in terms of their performance and looking at themselves. We gave them lots of support help. Then they had to upload the evidence. Now, so they've got their mobile devices, they upload the evidence, they've got their media generation. One more, please. And then they've got to present, and this is the creative bit, you see. And because of the way we designed the actual final assessment process in doing this, students had an opportunity to go back and tweak what they were doing. A bit like, you're writing a paper. It's not the first cut that gets, goes off. You write it, you get it reviewed by your peers, you then rewrite it a bit more, and your intent is to try and make it a little bit better. That's exactly what the students did. And
Can I just do the question, are there any, give me the thing.
sorry.
The baton.
Oh, the baton.
All right. I just really want to know how much ePortfolios use at UCT.
Okay.
You're the ePortfolio guru.
Okay.
I mean, is this something that's coming into UCT?
No, we don't have an institutional system for portfolios, so we generally work with lecturers to come up with various solutions depending on the content.
Okay.
The purpose of the portfolio, so for public things, perhaps a word press, if digital literacy of a class or is really low, we go with like our LMS as project type.
Yep. Okay.
This was all Mahara.
This one was all done with an open source job called Mahara, which comes out of New Zealand. It's a particularly powerful platform. It has single sign-on to Moodle or Blackboard or whatever. So,
Mahara, Google it. Right.
okay, so what we did is our reference. We really wanted to see if we could change students' engagement. I think it's reasonably self-evident, and also our grading indicated that if you change students' approaches to learning from surface to deep, A, you get better learning outcomes, and B, you get much higher levels of student engagement. So we used all of this, and what we did was we found that, guess what? You're not out of a job yet just because of technology. The teacher was absolutely crucial in the way they front-ended the beginning of the semester in terms of ensuring you got decent outcomes. I'm only mentioning one particular project at this point, but we had so much evidence that a teacher, given all the resources, given all of the training, given everything you could possibly do, could bring any innovative process completely undone by the end of the second week, and certainly by the end of the month, in terms of their behaviour and the way they engaged and interacted with the students. This teacher was a great, and eventually this project helped them become Teacher of the Year in what they did. Okay. So we got all of these outcomes. We had compelling evidence, better engagement, motivation, critical thinking. The students themselves started to drive the process by about the 8th or 9th week. Mobiles were seen as learning tools. Yes, they were social tools. We can't possibly take that away from them. But they were engaged in what they were doing. They were engaged in the activities in what they were doing.
And it's one of the ways in which you can use learning analytics.
Yeah.
Looking at what students are doing on their mobiles and these bigger pictures. Sorry.
Okay. Now, this for us was the absolute clincher that we'd got something right. Using the study process questionnaire, we knew that about 23 to 26% of students had deep approaches to learning in the wider cohort. That was about as best we could. So in other words, nearly 80% of students took a very shallow, very pragmatic, learn the rules, and this is how we're going to learn English. Our group, time and again, showed that we had more than a change in approaches to learning. The strategies they were learning to learn the English language changed dramatically by more than 2 standard deviations. And this was a pretty outstanding result. And that group of students had such a powerful experience in terms of what they did. It flowed over into the ways they interacted elsewhere. The second study was a very interesting one.
Any questions?
Yeah, any questions about that one?
Notice by our cute little numbering system?
3 and 1.
You see, I know that the next slide, it's just a little suggestion if you're doing number things, you change the number. So we're on section.
So this is example 2.
Yeah. Any questions after that?
And there's a reference for this particular questionnaire, and it's great pre and post to look at not just grades, but look at students' strategies to the way in which they go about learning stuff. Okay. All good. Okay, second one was an interesting one. This was high school students. So anybody in the audience whose focus is primarily in the school environment, we were asked in to solve a particular problem for international baccalaureate students who were doing field studies in the middle of far north Thailand with no internet and no connectivity and really serious difficulties.
It has some relevance for many areas.
Yeah, it does. This is a project, to be quite honest with you, that I think could easily be translated into the African context. Elements of this we took into the Philippines, where the chances of you having power for a day were 0. Your power was going to go out at some time, and so you needed to have more reasonable strategies. Anyway, let's have a look at this. So, we were looking at mobile devices in particular for data collection, and this is the other key one, student engagement and field work. All right, so the qualitative data, observational, we literally went out and watched our students what they did, and we monitored what they did. We gave semi-structured interviews during and after the events, and we did post-field trip interviews, semi-structured interviews with the teachers at the end to see what sort of behaviour. Why the mobile? It's pretty obvious, isn't it? They're portable. You get social interactivity is very, very important in them. You can do context-sensitive data gathering processes. There's all sorts of tools you can use. You've got the GPSs sitting in there. You've got the cameras sitting in there that'll use GIS information for it. You've got Excel. You can use apps to count things. And connectivity. Getting information. At one stage, we actually just powered up our LAN in the bus for students to exchange data at lunchtime. It was very, very straightforward, and the students immediately changed, because that was one of the big problems. One of the things that we found difficult, and part of the reason we were asked as university staff to come and help out with this problem, was that every year a significant group of students would leave their research area and come back, and guess what? They don't have sufficient information or the right data in order to complete their major assignments. So these were very high-profile assessment tasks that resulted in their final grades for the International Baccalaureate. So they're very serious, and what do? You keep dummy data, which is not a realistic experience for the students. So off we went. We basically had a little diagram like this. So we had the smartphones in the field. We simply took the database of the LMS, dropped it onto a mobile server, attached a LAN, and then just created our own LAN in the classroom in the middle of nowhere. This is what I'm saying. It actually has some possibility, I think, for the African situation. We didn't really need much electricity because the mobile server would just power it. And all of a sudden, we had a mechanism for engaging our students, for moving the data around. And guess what? When they got hold of the data, they could do something with it. And that's exactly what they did. So, each team had at least one, or they used their own. We found that once you gave them the tools, guess what? They were very keen to collect as much information, because this was a high-stakes task they had involved. And therefore they started to take voice notes. Now we didn't tell them to go and take voice notes of what they were doing, but they did. And they'd be standing there with their measurement tools, and they brought with their science measurement or their photographs, and they'd be saying, oh, we need to know this. And they're giving themselves a whole range of extra information well above what we'd asked for. And we had a lot of office documents for just in time in case they forgot some of the basic procedures. When we brought them back into the camp and started using the server, we had literally thousands of interactions. We had about 60 to 65 of these students, and they were online all the time. So this 20 times per student over 4 days meant all that information was suddenly moved, and they were starting to process the data before they even left the environment. Now what happened? So, again, guess what? It depended on the teacher. If the teacher didn't give the approval to use this material, it wasn't positive about it, the students didn't want to offend their teacher, and so they would sort of put the devices in their pocket and nothing would happen. Okay, and they'd rely on paper and pen because that's what the teacher liked. So the teacher was crucial. Building that confidence takes both people. Okay, but as soon as they got back to camp, and all the students all sat around, they immediately had their computers, they had their LANs, they had the LAN available to them, guess what? They all engaged. So back at camp, it didn't make any difference about the teacher. It's what their peers were doing that was more important. The engagement, everybody admitted that they went from having parties to actually doing the work. The field work was basically complete, and a lot of processing was done, and gaps were identified before they even finished the camp. Now here's the interesting part. There were a couple of teachers in this particular environment who really were not comfortable, right? And that comfort was a serious problem for us. So even though they admitted that they could see students were working better, you cannot underestimate the effort that has to go in to these kinds of pedagogical and instrumental changes to an environment when a teacher likes doing something in a particular way. And so, you know, getting this statement out of a technology negative teacher, you know, it was very tedious, time consuming, boring, and all of a sudden we got down to advertising of data. So they recognized good activity, but this is the key issue. They were not comfortable admitting it, even though it was right there in front of them. Whereas the students loved it. Having access and engagement, they knew it was value to them, and therefore they moved on, please. Okay. The camp leader was incredibly happy because a whole range of educational problems simply vanished in what they were trying to accomplish. And they really had serious problems previously, and so they went on and did it. Now, I guess we'll finish with, did this innovation continue? And this is where the element of leadership becomes crucial. There's no two ways about it. The data we had said that the innovation, the use of the technology, the data gathering using mobile devices had enormous benefits for the students, resulting in more complete and more coherent, high-stakes assignment submissions. But the technology teacher, who was very negative and very, very weak, and we mentioned right at the beginning the issues around teacher literacies being crucial to any change or any innovation, then that teacher became head of department, and within 3 years they stopped doing this. So I cannot point out this was a great success, but I have to, put the rider that the issue is the importance of leadership and the importance of having teachers that are very, very confident with the environment. If you spent 25 years being the master of your discipline and the font of all knowledge in your classroom, and you're put into a situation where you're neither of those two things, then that becomes extremely threatening to individuals. Come on.
Just to put a bit extra on that one. One of my roles as Director of Teaching and Learning was a conversation every year with each department. Sometimes it was in a departmental meeting because the department head wanted the conversation to be open. and sometimes it was with the department head alone. And it wasn't just about data to do with e-learning, it was about a number of sets of data that the centre produced about students' experience and students' attitudes and students this and that and the other, and we would monitor this and track it over time. And it was working with the heads of departments. So I don't know what CILT does in terms of getting to the power structures in departments. You can work with the innovative teachers and you get somewhere, but if you don't work with the person who is so important about culture and policy within the local organisation, it just all fades away. And so changing the culture of the organisation through the heads of departments is, I think, really important. Okay, should we move on? There's two more examples. One of them I'll go through really quickly. They're all about peer review and peer assessment. And as David's already said, in a Chinese context, trust is not a high commodity. And it's often very difficult to literally get behind the inscrutable smile as to what's really going on and what's likely to happen. So it's something that working with the concept of trust is important. Okay, the first example is one that I think is win-win-win. Okay, next one. And it was about group work being in a blended learning environment and students' reactions to peer assessment. And it was in a context where there was very little group work and certainly no peer assessment. Right? Now, the teacher, again, we've highlighted the importance of the teacher. The teacher, Mohan, he in the end did go through the J-curve, came out the other end, and now, I guess it's now 12 years later, maybe even more, 13, 14 years later, is still got this particular learning design quite actively used in his department. We actually analysed the student assessments using that solo framework I talked about, so that, in other words, validating A equals A. Because remember, there's the student assessments. We want to find out if the students were at the same standard of grading as teachers, and yes, they are. We looked at the, obviously, the user statistics. We had evaluations of various sorts, as I'll explain. Next one. Now, this is it. It's slightly different twist to the ordinary case-based learning process. And you start off and you have two groups, which I'll call the purple group and the green group. Right, now, both students are doing case one, whatever it is. And while this was a business course, as far as I'm concerned, it's anything that you can make into a case-based scenario. So they both get the case materials. Initially, they were done by the teacher, but in later years, done by the students. Another assignment was to develop, banks of case-based resources. So he managed to push more of the work appropriately onto the students. Anyway, so we've got case one. First stage is warming up. And the purple group, who are the actors, and these are the minders, the purple group would do a bit of a summary and look at the issues and hypothesis or whatever they wanted, and they would get feedback from the minders, right? The second stage, they'd find resources and interrogate issues and look at data from a number of sources or do whatever they had to do, and they'd produce another report, and that would get feedback from the minders. So they'd had two sets of feedback. They would then come up with a final solution or summary or whatever, and they would again get some feedback on the way before the final process. Now, all this is teacher independent. Right? There's these two groups working together. Then at this stage, there's what the evaluation and assessment. There was intra-group evaluation in the purple group. So in other words, they did one of those questionnaires that said that, John was lazy and didn't contribute and therefore he doesn't deserve the same mark, or Betty did more than anyone else and deserves more, and so on. So they did intra-group evaluation. The green group gave a mark to the assignment. Now that mark was moderated by the teacher, but nevertheless it was up to the green group to basically do the assessment of the particular piece. The purple group gave feedback to the green group on the quality, what they thought they'd added to the experience. All right? So we end up with a huge amount of feedback given to students without, the need for teachers being online at 3 o'clock in the morning trying to give feedback to people. Right? Now, and then what happens is that the green group become purple and the purple group become green. So these two groups are intertwined for 2 rounds of case-based learning, and then they go through the whole process again. And the students' comments was that it's fabulous to get all of this feedback, and they did find it helpful, and there were needs for some interpersonal conflicts to be negotiated, but surprisingly few. This is an innovation in learning design. It doesn't require much technology, as you can see. They just use VLMS for sharing, drafts and so on. But the other thing they commented on, without being asked, was how much they'd learnt about the process of critique, because they had to learn how to give and receive feedback. I don't know how any of you respond to some of the peer feedback you get when you submit a journal article, but you have to occasionally look at yourself and say, why am I feeling a bit negative? Because you need to know how to receive feedback as well as to give it. So in my view, this is probably one of the best learning designs I've come across. It's sustainable. It's no longer dependent on this particular teacher. It's become inculcated into the department. It's not technology heavy, and it relies on lots and lots of feedback. Now, I can't remember what's on the next slide, so you've got to show it.
Is the peer evaluation, is it anonymous or anonymized?
Well, not really. Well, yes, in the sense, the intra-group, the intra-group one is anonymized. Although in the Australian context I'm about to talk about later, no. But in the Hong Kong context, we are a little bit more mindful of the issues of face. But in the end, the students, I think, because in the end they talked about it. They tended to sit down and talk about what are we going to say about each other. And they did. I think you play with this one is depending on what your context is. And there are sensitivities in Hong Kong that just don't exist in Australia. Okay, so the double strategy group is very popular. They really liked it. They liked being, they understood the role of the minders. It's the role of the minders that's really the interesting bit. And there was this protection, because if the green group had been really nasty, then the purple group could have a go back at them. And we did have a couple of, things like that to negotiate, but that's all part of learning professional interaction. The assessment quality was high. We did a solo analysis, and other staff took up the learning design. Okay, final example. Oh, okay.
In many of these projects, quite often you got a collection of unintended learning outcomes. And Carmel's just alluded to this about professional practice.
That was intended.
Yeah, and
how we set it up.
Yeah, I understand that, but quite often when you're doing these projects, you get unintended outcomes from your students. And a lot of times we were required to show information or computer literacy in our students. And some of these projects enable that. Yeah, okay.
Good, thank you. My last example is even cuter. Right, this one is, I had the privilege of being the external evaluator for this funded project at the University of Queensland, okay, and it was looking at interdisciplinary scenario inquiry tasks in large first-year science students. This is a context where, I don't know if you get this in South Africa, but there are 1,500 students, up to 1,500 students in first year chemistry at the University of Queensland, because it's a service course for all the bits and pieces. And they were herding the students into lecture theatres, 600 at a time, and lecturing at them and then giving them multiple choice tests, because that was about all they could do. Surprisingly, the retention into second year chemistry was not high. And so Gwen, who is the first, Gwen Larry, she is an amazing person. She got the funding for this project and set it up, and let me explain it, okay? We wanted to know, I'll get to the next slide, whether or not these grand claims were substantiated. Very large, it's a research-intensive university, and it's first year undergraduate chemistry, and lots and lots of data. Okay, move along. It's your projector, because this was okay before. It's being trimmed somehow, it doesn't matter. We really wanted to know if students could do real-world chemistry at first-year level. Right, so it wasn't, because in chemistry, as in many other disciplines, there's this myth that you have to teach them the foundation. So they don't do anything interesting until they get to third year. So you teach them all sorts of stuff in first year, they do a little bit in second year, and finally they do a project in third year. Now we're turning that on its head by saying, can students effectively tackle genuine, authentic problems in a first-year context if you structure it really well? So we were interested in interdisciplinary thinking, scientific reasoning, communication, and again being able to do quantitative reasoning. Okay, next one. The students, move along, I think I'll do that to the next. There are 27 scenarios in the thing. The students would self-select into groups of 4. This was all managed by a computer system, because with that many students you had to have some way of tracking little dears. And they would select a topic, and if there were students who couldn't get into a group of 4 for whatever reason, they would be added to a group of 4. So at the end, let's say you had 1,500 students, you've only got 375 groups. So that's reducing the issue quite a bit. We had professional science writers. Now, if you're going to use money, using it on good quality resources is really useful. So we had professional science writers who, the next one I think as well, who wrote all of these scenarios. And what I'm going to talk about is Chocoholics Anonymous. And, you know, next one. Okay, this is the first question. Healthy chocolate. You know, is there such a thing? That was the main question. Is the biggest barrier to success this ultimate product related to production or to consumer perception? Each of the 4 students, keep going to get all 4 up, each of the 4 students would do one question. Now, each of those 4 questions, which are about the process of making chocolate, about some of the biotechnology particularly in making the thingies that go in the middle of it, looking at sugar and fat, and looking at psychotropic properties of chocolate. All of those cannot be just added together to answer the middle question. So that's where the design is really nice, that you have to get things for students to do, so that if one person doesn't do anything, then it's very difficult to answer. So there's a lot of peer pressure on everyone to make sure that everybody answered their bit. And then they would come together. The next one will show how it's done. It's all managed by computer. The students at this point here had to give their individual question, that is, submission. So each of them had to, and that would be monitored. They'd be monitored. If they didn't, there'd be emails sent. Why haven't you put in your individual comment? So they get the scenarios, they join a group, they sort themselves out, they put in their individual IQs, they work collaboratively on the meta question, they submit a research report. Again, the same sort of stuff of internal peer assessment, external peer review. It says here academic mark, but the academic mark was only as a moderation. That should actually get changed, because we had students marking other students. Who wants to read 375 reports? So we got groups to mark other groups. Again, the academic did moderate, and we did the same process of solo analysis of assessments and so on. Next one. We looked at, oh well, go on. Yeah. Learning outcomes, learning process, learning, yeah. Interestingly, they didn't necessarily communicate via the elaborate system. Queensland University is a nice campus and they met in a coffee shop. That's fine. You know, it depends on your context. Next one. Just keep going. The students did reflect, if you go on. I'm sorry, this goes. The student, the students did give reasons internally as to why. So the person who got negative feedback from their peers would get it, you know, written. They had to write a comment, not just give a grade on their things. And they appraised the other group. So a chocolate group would take another chocolate group. Okay, keep going. Keep going, keep going. And just a focus group comment, keep going. And again, I put this one back in again because you all are going to look at the solar taxonomy now. Yes. It's wonderful, fantastic thing. And you can do things, and your own grading. All students have to get when you're doing assessment is A, B, C, D, E. That's it. Okay, next one.
And it's a very powerful tool for bookending course designs in that you can use it for writing the aims and learning outcomes, but you can also use it for assessment, and you can train students in the process. So we had this built into our LMS for students to rate postings, for example.
Yeah. So it's a really cool strategy. All right, so in both of those, well, the reason I chose those two is that you can use, we didn't have the double group thing in this, it was just one round of process, but in the quite small business course, that double group strategy worked extremely well. In this one, in the first one, in the chemistry one, with 1,500 students, we had effective, and in our belief, better learning of some fundamental chemistry. I mean, this took up about 30% of the course, so it was actually a substantial part of it. They had ordinary lectures and so on as well. The ultimate success of that project is higher entry into second year chemistry. Students got engaged and turned on by chemistry in the process. Okay, there is a summary of our principles. It's 1 o'clock, so I know we have to finish. I think evaluation research has to be based on a coherent learning design. There's not much point in, you know, I'm saying articulating the learning design, articulating the elements, looking at what you're trying to achieve is important. I like design-based research. I think that process of articulating what you're doing up front and then continuing along, and I think that's got a lot of potential. Making sure you know what your evaluation research questions are and good data collection methods. Final one, and this is important, publish your findings. And it's not just because you get brownie points on this horrendous DHET system that you have here in South Africa. You do, but it's more that it is an obligation to put it out into the community of academic researchers in general. And when you use that evidence in institutional and governmental settings, I could persuade my Pro-Vice Chancellor to give me money because I would say, here's the gap in what exists in the institution at the moment. So there's a lot of power to be gained from good evaluation research, personally and institutionally. And on that level, questions, if there's any, or Tony, we have to finish or whatever. Oh, it's a nice graphic, yes. That's it. No, you don't. All the references are there that you will undoubtedly all read over the weekend. Yeah, right.
If not tonight.
Yeah. Okay, all right, questions? No, it's lunchtime.
Colleagues taking part virtually, are there particular closing comments that you'd like to post? that we can feed back into the room.
Already taken that final report.
Yes.
Yummy, fantastic.
Okay, Carmel is elated that you've downloaded the report for a penny. And I'm sure there are going to be a lot more questions that appear here, but we're actually really at the closing time for the event, and maybe we can find another way to take up the questions. But closing comments, please.
Happy to come back. I like Cape Town. It's my first visit.
Not overdue.
Perhaps if any closing comments in the physical room.
Actually, there was a question someone brought up about whether or not the university has buy-in into its gap. Yeah, into peer assessment. Do we do that at UCT? Can we just do it and apologize?
So as far as I understand it, if you look at, like, I don't see that anyone would ever be able to do peer assessment as the only thing. But if you did it as a class assessment activity, if your class was doing an assignment, and you had a peer assessment element, I know that in engineering, for example, a lot of it have peer assessment elements. So this is
Between peer review and peer assessment.
Yeah, I think one of the key issues, and one of the things that we found when we were using it in other projects with Carmel's, is the percentage to which you assign as the overall, grade determining factor. And I think provided you keep it at a reasonable size, the advantages in terms of development of graduate learning outcomes and attributes far outweigh any disadvantages that you might get because the students are learning how to grade each other. So it does take time. And I remember I took a group of students.
It saves time.
It does take time to do the training, but you get it back so many multiple times over that it's worth the effort. And I remember somebody saying to me in a very adamant way, well, students really are incapable of evaluating each other. They'll lie, they'll cheat, they'll back, I remember seeing an example where I took a group of students one time, and these were grade 3 or grade 2 students. And they were evaluating a performance, and they only had 3 little questions. So when you start an evaluation process, really, if you get them while they're young, they start to be able to learn the skills and the knowledge to be able to make these critical evaluations without being nasty or giving good marks to their friends and things like that. So yes, there's a learning curve, but it can be addressed.
Colleagues, I think we're beyond that time. And I really want to thank everybody who's participated in the physical space in the CILT offices and in the virtual space in the Adobe Connect synchronous meeting room for being here and allocating the time to the seminar. And especially I want to thank our presenters, Carmel McNaught and David Kennedy, for the insight and experience and depth of analysis that they brought to us today, with a lot of good information and useful and inspiring principles and practice for how we go about improving both our learning design and our assessment design as part of the same system. Thank you very much to both of you. Maybe there will be some virtual chairs as well. Okay. And you must remember that they were both wearing slippers while taking part in this presentation.